Okay, hi guys, welcome back to the BFG by Roald Dahl. Sorry I've not uploaded a video in such a long time. I have been away with my partner, stayed around his house for a little bit, and then we went to the Netherlands, we went to Amsterdam, so haven't been able to get to the computer to read another chapter or so of the BFG. So let's keep going. I think it's chapter 13. I've just checked my channel. Yeah. So it's chapter 13, a Trogglehumper for the Fleshlumpeater. Just want to say this is all Roald Dahl's own work. I'm just reading it for pleasure. Okay, let's go. A Trogglehumper for the Fleshlumpeater. They always have him 50 winks before they go scumpering off to hunt the human beings in the evening, the BFG said. He stopped for a few moments to let Sophie have a better look. Giants is only sleeping every now and then, he said. Not nearly as much as human beings. Human beings is crazy for sleeping. Is it ever occurring to you that a human being who is 50 is spending about 20 years sleeping fast? I must admit that never occurred to me, Sophie said. You should allow it to occur to you, the BFG said. Imagine it, please. This human being who says he is 50 has been fast asleep for 20 years and is not even knowing where he is. Not even doing anything. Not even thinking. It is a funny thought, Sophie said. Exactly, the BFG said. So I is trying to explain to you that a human being who says he is 50 is not 50. He is only 13. What about me, Sophie said. I'm 8. You is not 8 at all, the BFG said. Human being babies and little chidlets are spending half their time sleeping, so you is only 4. I'm 8, Sophie said. You may think you is 8, the BFG said, but you has only spent 4 years of your life with your little eyes open. You is only 4, and please stop higgling me. Chitty little snapper-wickers like you should not be higgling around with an old sage and onions who is hundreds of years more than you. How much do giants sleep? Sophie asked. They is never wasting more time snozzling, the BFG said. 2 or 3 hours is enough. When do you sleep? Sophie asked. Even less, the BFG answered. I is sleeping only once in a blue baboon. Sophie, peeping out from her pocket, examined the 9 sleeping giants. They looked even more grotesque now than when they were awake. Sprawled out across the yellow plain, they covered an area about the size of a football field. Most of them were lying on their backs with their enormous mouths wide open, and they were snoring like foghorns. The noise was awful. Suddenly, the BFG gave a jump in the air. By gum frog, he cried. Why, it's just having the most wopsy-whiffling idea. What? Sophie said. Wait, he cried. Hold your horse feathers. Keep your skirt on. Just you wait and see what I is going to bring about. He galloped off fast to his cave with Sophie hanging on tight to the rim of the pocket. He rolled back to the stone. He entered the cave. He was very excited. He was moving quickly. You stay where you is in my pocket, Huggy Bee, he said. We is doing this lovely bit of buck swashling both together. He laid aside the dream-catching net, but hung on to the suitcase. He ran across the other side of the cave and grabbed the long trumpet thing, the one he had been carrying when Sophie had first seen him in the village. With the suitcase in one hand and the trumpet in the other, he dashed out of the cave. What is he up to now? Sophie wondered. Keep your head up good, the BFG said. Then you will get a fine wrinkle of what is going on. When the BFG came near to the sleeping giant, he slowed his pace. He began moving softly. He crept on his toes to the ugly brutes. They were still snoring loudly. They looked repulsive, filthy, diabolical. The BFG tiptoed around them. He went past the gid scalper, the blood bottler, the meat dripper, the child chewer. Then he stopped. He had reached the Fleshlumpeater. He pointed at him. Then he looked down at Sophie and gave her a big wink. He knelt on the ground, and very quickly he opened the suitcase. He took out the glass jar containing the terrible nightmarish Trogglehumper. At that point, Sophie guessed what was going to happen next. Ouch, she thought. This could be rather dangerous. She crouched lower in the pocket so that only the top of her head and her eyes were showing. She wanted to be ready to duck out of sight very fast, should anything go wrong. They were about 10 feet away from the Fleshlumpeater's face. The snoring, snorting noise was making was disgusting. Every now and again, a big bubble of spit formed between its two open lips, and then it would burst with a splash and cover his face with saliva. Taking infinite care, the BFG unscrewed the top of the glass jar and tipped the squiggling, squirming, faintly scarlet Trogglehumper into the wide end of his long trumpet. He put the other end of the trumpet to his lips. He aimed the instrument directly at the Fleshlumpeater's face. He took a deep breath, puffed out his cheeks, and then woof, he blew. Sophie saw a flash of pale red goo darting towards the giant's face. For a split second it hovered above the face, then it was gone. It seemed to have been sucked up the giant's nose, but it had all happened so quickly, Sophie couldn't be sure. "We had better be skidding away to where it is safe," the BFG whispered. He trotted off for about 100 yards, then he stopped. He crouched low to the earth. "Now," he said, "we is waiting for the gun and the flames to begin." They didn't have long to wait. The air was suddenly pierced by the most fearful roar Sophie had ever heard, and she saw the Fleshlumpeater's body, all 54 feet of it, rise up off the ground and fall back again with a thump. Then it began to wriggle and twist and bounce about in the most violent fashion. It was quite frightening to watch. "Yow!" roared the Fleshlumpeater. "Hey! Ow!" "He's still asleep," the BFG whispered. "The terrible trog-humping nightmare is beginning to hit him." "Serves him right," Sophie said. She could feel no sympathy for this great brute who ate children as though they were sugar lumps. "Save us!" screamed the Fleshlumpeater, thrashing about madly. "He is after me! He is getting me!" The thrashing of limbs and the waving of arms became more violent by the second. It was an awesome thing to watch such a massive creature having such mighty convulsions. "It's Jack!" bellowed the Fleshlumpeater. "It's the gruffle, gracious Jack! Jack is after me! Jack is whack-hackling me! Jack is spike-sticking me! Jack is splash-spunkling me! It was a terrible fight, swiping Jack!" The Fleshlumpeater was writhing all over the ground, like some colossal tortured snake. "Oh, spare me, Jack!" he yelled. "Don't hurt me, Jack!" "Who is this Jack he's on about?" Sophie whispered. "Jack is the only human beings all giants is frightened of," the BFG told her. "They is all absolutely terrified of Jack. They is all hearing that Jack is a famous giant killer." "Save me!" screamed the Fleshlumpeater. "Have mercy on this poor little giant, the beanstalk! He is coming at me with his terrible spike-sticking beanstalk. Take it away! I is begging you, Jack. I is praying you not to touch with your terrible spike-sticking beanstalk." "Us giants," the BFG whispered, "is not knowing very much about this dreaded human being called Jack. We is knowing only that he is famous giant killer, and he is owning something called the beanstalk. We is knowing also that the beanstalk is a fearsome thing, and Jack is using it to kill giants." Sophie couldn't stop smiling. "What is you giggling at?" the BFG asked her, slightly nettled. "I'll tell you later," Sophie said. The awful nightmare had now gripped the great brute to such an extent that he was tying his whole body into knots. "Do not do it, Jack!" he screeched. "I was not eating you, Jack. I has never eaten human beings. I swear I has never gobbled a single human being in all my wholesome life." "Liar!" said the BFG. Just then one of the Fleshlumpeater's flaming fists caught the still fast asleep, meat-dripping giant smack in the mouth. At the same time, one of his furiously thrashing legs kicked the snoring, gurgling giant right in the guts. Both the injured giants woke up and leaped to their feet. "He is swiping me right under the mouth," yelled the meat dripper. "He is bug-swoggling me smack in the guts," shouted the gurgler. The two of them rushed at the Fleshlumpeater and then began pounding it with their fists and feet. The wretched Fleshlumpeater woke up with a bang. He awoke straight from a nightmare into another. He roared into battle, and in the bellowing, thumping, rough and tumble that followed the sleeping giant after after either got stepped upon or kicked, soon all 9 of them were on their feet having the most almighty free-for-all. They punched and kicked and scratched and bit and butted each other as hard as they could. Blood flowed, noses went crunch, teeth fell out like hailstones. The giants roared and screamed and cursed, and for many minutes the noise of the battle rolled across the yellow plain. The BFG smiled a big wild smile of absolute pleasure. I is loving it when they is all having a good tough and rumble, he said. They'll kill each other, Sophie said. Never, the BFG answered. Those beasts is always bishing or walloping at one another. Soon it will be getting dusky, and they will be galloping off to fill their tummies. They're coarse and foul and filthy, Sophie said. I hate them. As the BFG headed back to the cave, he said quietly, We certainly was putting that nightmare to good use, though, wasn't we? Excellent use, Sophie said. Well done, you. Next chapter, Dreams. The big friendly giant was seated at the great table in his cave, and he was doing his homework. Sophie sat cross-legged on the tabletop nearby, watching him at work. The glass jar containing one and only dream that they had caught that day stood between them. The BFG, with great care and patience, was printing something on a piece of paper with an enormous pencil. What are you writing? Sophie asked him. Every dream is having its special label on the bottle, the BFG said. How else could I be finding the one I am wanting in a hurry? But you can really and truly tell what sort of dream is going to be simply by listening to it, Sophie asked. I can, the BFG said, not looking up. But how? Is it the way that it hums and buzzes? You is less or more right, the BFG said. Every dream in the world is making a different sort of buzzy hum music, and these grand swashbuckling ears of mine is able to read that music. By music, do you mean tunes? I is not meaning tunes. Then what do you mean? Human beings is having their own music, right or left? Right, Sophie said. Lots of music. And sometimes human beings is very overcome when they is hearing wondrous music. They is getting shivers down their spindles, right or left? Right, Sophie said. So the music is saying something to them. It is sending a message. I do not think that human beings is knowing what the message is, but they is loving it just the same. That's about right, Sophie said. But because of these jump squiffling ears of mine, the BFG said, I is not only able to hear the music that Dreams is making, but I is understanding it also. What do you mean understanding it? Sophie said. I can read it, the BFG said. It talks to me. It is like a language. I find that I find that just a little hard to believe, Sophie said. I'll bet you is also finding it hard to believe in quadwinkles, the BFG said, and how they is visiting us from the stars. Of course I don't believe that, Sophie said. The BFG regarded her gravely with those huge eyes of his. I hope you'll forgive me, he said, if I ever tell you that human beings is thinking they is very clever, but they is not. They is nearly all of them not muchers and squick peeps. I beg your pardon, Sophie said. The matter with human beings, the BFG went on, is that they is absolutely refusing to believe in anything unless they is acting or seeing it right in front of their own schnozzles. Of course, Quogwinkles is existing. I is meeting them oftenly. I is even chittering to them. He turned away contemptuously from Sophie and resumed his writing. Sophie moved over to read what he had written so far. The letters were printed big and bold, but were not well formed. Here is what it said. This dream is about how I is saving my teacher from the drowning. I is diving into the river from a high bridge, and I is dragging my teacher to a bank, and then I is giving him the kiss of death. The kiss of what? Sophie asked. The BFG stopped writing and raised his head slowly. His eyes rested on Sophie's face. I was telling you once before, he said quietly, that I is never having a chance to go to school. I is full of mistakes. They is not my fault. I do my best. You is a lovely little girl, but please remember that you is not exactly must know everything yourself. I'm sorry, Sophie said. I really am. It is rude of me to keep correcting you. The BFG gazed at her for a while longer. Then he bent his head again to slow his laborious writing. Tell me honestly, Sophie said, if you blew this dream into my bedroom when I was asleep, would I really and truly start dreaming about how I have saved my teacher from drowning by diving off the bridge? More, the BFG said, a lot more. But I cannot be scribbling the whole grub-flunking dream on a teensy bit of paper. Of course there is more. The BFG laid down his pencil and placed one massive ear close to the jar. For about 30 seconds he listened intently. Yes, he said, nodding the great head solemnly up and down. This dream is continuing very nice. It had a dory hunking ending. How does it end? Sophie said. Please tell me. You would be dreaming, the BFG said. that the morning after you were saving the teacher from the river, you was arriving at school and you were seeing all the 500 pupils sitting in the assembly hall and all the teachers as well. And the head teacher is then standing up and saying, I is wanting the whole school to give 3 cheers for Sophie because she is so brave and is saving the life of our fine arithmetic teacher, Mr. Figgins, who was unfortunately pushed off a bridge into the river by our gym teacher, Miss Amelia Upscotch. So 3 cheers for Sophie, and the whole school was then cheering like mad and shouting bravo, well done. And for ever after that, even when you was getting your sums and gun swiggles and muddled up, Mr. Figgins is always giving you 10 out of 10 and writing good work, Sophie, in your exercise book. Then you was waking up. I like that dream, Sophie said. Of course you like it, the BFG said. It is a fizz wizard. He licked the back of his label and stuck it on the jar. I was usually writing a bit more than this on the labels, he said, but you was watching me and making me jump, see. I'll go and sit somewhere else, Sophie said. Don't go, he said. Look in the jar carefully, and I think you'll be seeing this dream. Sophie peered into the jar, and there, sure enough, she saw the faint translucent outline of something about the size of a hen's egg. There was just a touch of colour in it, a pale sea green, soft and shimmering and very beautiful. There it lay, this small oblong sea green jellyish thing, at the bottom of the jar, quite peaceful but pulsing gently, the whole of it moving in and out ever so slightly, as though it were breathing. It's moving, Sophie cried. It's alive. Of course it's alive. Will you feed it on? Sophie asked. It's not needing any food, the BFG told her. That's cruel, Sophie said. Everything alive needs food of some sort, even trees and plants. The north wind is alive, the BFG said. It's moving. It touched you on the cheek and the hands, but nobody is feeding it. Sophie was silent. This extraordinary giant was disturbing her ideas. He seemed to be leading her towards mysteries that were beyond understanding. A dream is not needing anything, the BFG went on. If it is a good one, it is waiting peaceably for ever until it is released and allowed to do its job. If it is a bad one, it is always fighting to get out. The BFG stood up and walked over to the one many shelf and placed the latest jar among the thousands of others. Please, can I see some of the other dreams? Sophie asked him. The BFG hesitated. Nobody has ever seen them before, he said, but perhaps after all I is letting you have a little peep. He picked her up off the table and he stood her on the palm of one of his huge hands. He carried her towards the shelves. Over here is some of the good dreams, he said, the fizz wizards. Would you hold me closer so I can read the labels? Sophie said. My labels is only telling bits of it, the BFG said. The dreams is usually much longer. The labels is just to remind me. Sophie started to read the labels. The first one seemed long enough to her. It went right around the jar, and as she read it, she had to keep turning the jar. This is what it says. Today I was sitting in class, and I discovered that if I was staring very hard at my teacher in a special way, I is able to put her to sleep. So I keep staring at her, and in the end her head drops on her desk, and she goes fast asleep and snorkles loudly. Then, in Marsh's, the head teacher, and she shouts, Wake up, Miss Plumbridge. How dare you go to sleep in class? Go fetch your hat and coat and leave this school for ever. You is sacked. But in a jiffy I was putting the head teacher to sleep as well, and he just crumples slowly to the floor like a lump of jelly, and there he lies all in a heap and starts snorkeling even louder than Miss Plumbridge. And then I was hearing my mummy's voice saying, Wake up, your breakfast is ready. What a funny dream, Sophie said. It's a ring bell, the BFG said. It's a whoopsie. Inside the jar, below the edge of the label, Sophie could see the putting to sleep dream lying peacefully on the bottom, pulsing gently, sea green like an other one, but perhaps a trifle larger. Do you have separate dreams for boys and girls? Sophie asked. Of course, the BFG said. If I was giving a girl's dream to a boy, even if it was really whoopsie girl's dream, the boy would be waking up and thinking what a rock-puddling, grin-sludging old dream that was. Boys would, Sophie said. These here is all girls' dreams on this shelf, the BFG said. Can I read a boy's dream? You can, the BFG said. He lifted her to a higher shelf. The label on the nearest boy's dream jar read as follows. I was making myself a marvellous pair of suction boots, and when I put them on I was able to walk straight up to the kitchen wall and across the ceiling, while I is walking upside down on the ceiling when my big sister comes in and she is starting to yell at me, as she always does, yelling, "What on earth is she doing up there walking on the ceiling?" And I looks down at her and I smiles and I says, "I told you you was driving me up the wall and now you has done it." "I find that one rather silly," Sophie said. "Boys wouldn't," the BFG said, grinning. "It's another ring, Bella. Perhaps you have seen enough now." "Let me read another boy's one," Sophie said. The next label said, "The telephone rings in the house and my father picks it up and says it's very important telephone voice. Simpkin speaking." Then his face goes white and his voice goes all funny and he says, "What? Who?" And then he says, "Yes, sir, I understand, sir. Surely it's me you was wishing to speak to, sir, not my little son." My father's face is going from white to dark purple and he's gulping like he has a lobster stuck in his throat. And then at last he is saying, "Yes, sir, very well, sir, I will get him, sir." And he turns to me and he says in a rather respectful voice, "Is you knowing the President of the United States?" And I says, "No, but I expect he is hearing about me." Then I is having a long talk on the phone and saying things like, "Let me take care of it, Mr. President. You'll bungle it all up if you do it your way." And my father's eyes is goggling right out of his head. And that is when I was hearing my father's real voice saying, "Get up, you lazy slob, or I'll be late for school." "Boys are crazy," Sophie said. "Let me read this next one." Sophie started reading the next label. I was having a bath, and I was discovering that if I press quite hard on my tummy button, a funny feeling comes over me, and suddenly my legs are not there, nor is my arms. In fact, I has become absolutely invisible all over. I is still there, but no one can see me, not even myself, so that Mummy comes in and says, "Where is that child? He was in the bath and a minute ago, and he can't possibly have washed himself properly." So I say, "Here I is," and she says, "Where?" And I says, "Here," and she says, "Where?" And I say, "Here," and she says, "Henry, come up quick." And when my daddy rushes in, I was watching myself, and my daddy sees the soap floating around in the air. But of course he is not seeing me, and he shouts, "Where are you, boy?" And I say, "Here," and he says, "Where?" And I say, "Here," and he says, "Where?" And I say, "Here," and he says, "The soap, boy, the soap, it's flying in the air." Then I press my tummy button again, and now I was visible. My daddy is squiffy with excitement. He says, "You is the invisible boy." And I says, "Now I is going to have some fun." So when I is out of my bath and I have dried myself, I put on my dressing gown and slippers, and I press my tummy button again to become invisible, and I go down into the town and I walk in the streets. Of course, only me is invisible, but not seeing the things I was wearing, so when people were seeing the dressing gown and slippers floating along the street with nobody in it, there is a panic with everybody yelling, "A ghost! A ghost!" And people are screaming left and right, and strong policemen is running for their lives. And best of all, I see Mr. Grummett, my algebra teacher, coming out of a pub, and I float up to him and say, "Boo!" And he lets out a frightsome howl and dashes back into the pub, and then I was waking up and feeling happy as a watch scribbler. "Pretty ridiculous," Sophie said. All the same, she couldn't resist reaching down and pressing her own tummy button to see if it worked. Nothing happened. "Dreams are very mystical things," the BFG said. "Human beings is not understanding them at all. Not even their brainiest professors is understanding them. Have you seen enough?" "Just this last one," Sophie said. "This one here." She started reading. "I has written a book and it is exciting, nobody can put it down. So as soon as you have read the first line, you is hooked on it. You cannot stop until the last page. In all the cities, people is walking in the streets, bumping into each other because their faces is buried in my book, and dentists is reading it and trying to fill the teeth at the same time. But nobody minds because they are all reading it too in their dentist chair. Drivers is reading it while driving, and cars is crashing all over the country. Brain surgeon is reading it while they is operating on brains, and airline pilots is reading it going into the Timbuktu instead of London. Football players is reading it on the field because they can't put it down, and so is Olympic runners while they is running. Everybody has to see what's going on to happen in my next book, and when I wake up, I am still tingling with excitement at being the greatest writer in the world has ever known, until my mummy comes in and says I was looking at your English exercise book last night, and really your spelling is atrocious. So is your punctuation. "That's enough for now," the BFG said. "There is dillions more, but my arm is getting tired holding you up. What are all those over there? Sophie said. Why have they got such tiny labels? That, the BFG said, is because one day I was catching so many dreams I was not having the time or energy to write out long labels. But there is enough to remind me. Can I look? Sophie said. The long-suffering BFG carried her across to the jars she was pointing to. Sophie read them rapidly, one after the other. I was climbing Mount Everest with just my pussycat for company. I was investing a car that runs on toothpaste. I was able to make the electric lights go on and off just by wishing it. I was only an 8-year-old little boy, but I was growing the splendid bushy beard and all the other boys were jealous. I was able to jump out of any high window and float down safely. I was a pet bee that makes a rock and roll music when it flies. What amazes me, Sophie said, is how ever you learnt to write in the first place. Ah, the BFG said. I've been wondering how long it is before you've asking me that. Considering you never went to school, I think it's quite marvellous, Sophie said. How do you learn? The BFG crossed the cave and opened a tiny secret door in the wall. He took out a book, a very old and tattered. By human standards, it was ordinary sized book, but it looked like a postage stamp in his huge hand. One night, he said, I was blowing a dream through a window and I seized this book lying on the little boy's bedroom table. I wanted it so badly, you understand, but I was refusing to steal it. I would never do that. So how did you get it? Sophie asked. I borrowed it, the BFG said, smiling a little. Just for a short time, I borrowed it. How long have you had it? Sophie asked. Perhaps only about 8 years, the BFG said. Soon I shall be putting it back. And that's how you taught yourself to write? Sophie asked him. I was reading it hundreds of times, the BFG said. Well, I am still reading it and teaching new words to myself and how to write them. It is the most scrumptious story. Sophie took the book out of his hand. Nicholas Nickleby, she read it out. By Dahl Chickens, the BFG said. By who? Sophie said. Just then came a tremendous noise of galloping feet from outside the cave. What was that? Sophie cried. That is all the giants whizzling off to another country to guzzle human beings, the BFG said. He quickly popped Sophie into his waistcoat pocket and then hurried to the cave entrance and rolled back to the stone. Sophie, peeping out of the spy hole, saw all 9 of the fearsome giants coming past at full gallop. Where is you off to tonight? Shouted the BFG. We is all flush bunking off to England tonight, answered the Fleshlumpeater as they went galloping past. England is a luctitious land of his fancying for few nice little English tiddlers. I, shouted the maid smile, is knowing where there's giggle house for girls, and I is guzzling myself full as a froth blower. And I knows where there's a boggle box for boys, shouted the kids gurgler. All I has to do is reach in and grab myself a handful. English boys is tasting extra liquishy. In a few seconds, the 9 galloping giants were out of sight. What did he mean? Sophie said, poking her head out the pocket. What is a giggle house for girls? He's meaning a girls' school, the BFG said. He'll be eating them by the bundle. Oh no, cried Sophie. And boys for our boys' school, the BFG said. It mustn't happen, Sophie cried out. We've got to stop them. We can't just sit here and do nothing. There's not a thing we can do, said the BFG. We're as helpless as horse feathers. He sat down on a large craggy blue rock near the entrance to his cave. He took Sophie from his pocket and put her beside him on the rock. It is now quite safe for you to be outside until they is coming back, he said. The sun had dipped below the horizon and it was getting dark. And that is where I'm going to stop today. The next chapter will be called The Great Plan, but I have run out of time for now. Hope you enjoyed that again. Thank you. It's really nice to be back. And until the next time, guys. Bye.